Okay, let's get on with this. One of the things that we've talked a little bit about over the course of the past couple of days is the story about, what's the story that we're trying to tell here? What's the story that we hope to tell? And of course, we are in a place that is so rich in stories. This is the appropriate place to be talking about this topic. But how you tell that story in sustainability and what you get to do and what you need to do to make that right is a really interesting topic. And here to tell that story is the co-founder of Free Range Studios, a good friend of ours, Sachs.
Hey, everybody. Did not wear the Hawaiian shirt, but I'll try to have fun up here anyway. So I'm going to talk about something a little bit change of pace, about the stories that we tell and about how stories can really accelerate this movement that we're all a part of. And I'd like to start with a story that takes place over 100 years ago. So at the same time that the Wright brothers were in Kitty Hawk camping out, trying to discover the secret of flight and inching every day closer and closer, there was another man who was rivaling them, who was going to beat them to the punch if he could. And this guy, his name was Samuel Langley, was way richer and way better known than them. He was actually the head of the Smithsonian Institute. Now, the Wright brothers had looked up at birds, and when they watched how effortlessly they were able to soar and control themselves on the wind, they became convinced that one day human beings would fly. Now, their idea was that to get there, it was going to take hundreds of hours dangerously off the ground. They were going to have to crash countless gliders, and every pet theory that they would come up with, they knew would one day prove to be completely wrong. Langley had a really different approach. He had hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he had one pet theory. And the pet theory now looks, a little bit silly. He thought that if he could take this aerodrome thing that he had created, which was like a double-winged box, and put it on a houseboat on the Potomac and launch it with a catapult, that he would achieve flight eventually. Now you can tell that this is not a very flexible approach. Every time he would launch this thing, he would bring out the press, he would tell them about his impending triumph, and launch the thing. It would go like straight up in the air and then crash right into the water. And then he would have to start again with hundreds of thousands of dollars down the tubes. At the same time, the Wright brothers were on Kitty Hawk quietly experimenting every day, changing their approach. They would spend hundreds of hours off the ground while Langley would really probably be in the air for about 2 minutes over the course of a decade with his inventions. Eventually, of course, the Wright brothers achieved flight, and Langley died embittered and embarrassed. Now, there was something about the mindsets of these two teams that really shows the difference in how we might approach a giant problem. You see, the more that Langley would bring out the press, and the more that he would sort of fail with this approach, the more determined he became to prove himself right. The more he would stay on that path that he was on. Whereas the Wright brothers, working in relative obscurity, had no belief in any particular way of doing things. And that's ultimately why they achieved what they did. But what Langley had fallen into is a well-studied but not very well popularized cycle. It's what I call the safe thinking cycle. And this is what we all face whenever we take on an enormous challenge. You see, we in this room, just like the Wright brothers who looked up at the birds and believed one day flight would be possible, we look at the vast resources of our Earth, and we are utterly convinced, most of us I think, that in the short term we can get to a 100% renewable future. But we know that along the way there are going to be setbacks. Some of the pet theories about how each of us think we'll get there will probably be proven wrong. We're going to be embarrassed as we proclaim this the next great thing. But how we respond to that and how we think flexibly will determine, I believe, whether we end up like the Wright brothers or end up like Langley. So let's talk for a minute about this safe thinking cycle. When you take on a big idea or a big challenge in a changing environment, what happens in all of our brains is we stick our neck out there and we sense a certain amount of threat, right? We've put our money, we've put our time, we've put our reputation on the line. And that creates this feeling of, oh my God, we better succeed, which leads to something that psychologists and neurobiologists call cortical arousal. Our brains get excited, we get into a bit of a fight or flight mentality, we have to make quick and important decisions to drive our projects forward. And it's been studied in the laboratory again and again and proven time and again that the more cortical arousal, the more excitement, the more risk we take, the more we fall into stereotypical thinking. the more we look to the lessons of the past, the more we repeat the ways of the well-worn paths. And when we're trying to do innovation, of course, stereotypical thinking doesn't get us very far. In fact, it sets us back, which leads to more threat awareness. Now, nowhere is stereotypical thinking more dangerous and more prevalent in our industry, I believe, than in how we communicate what we're trying to do. It's not going to be technology or policies alone that's going to get us to where we need to go. It's going to be building that will of the public, of partners, of government, of corporations, and that comes down to how we communicate what we're doing. And I think that we're locked in a safe thinking cycle because we believe that if we can just get across the facts and the figures and the science and our passion for this endeavor, people will get on board. And it's not happening fast enough because we're communicating in ways that human beings aren't moved by. They're not moved by facts and logic. They're moved by stories and emotion. Now, Madison Avenue discovered this 70 years ago. They stopped talking about the facts and features of their products, and they started telling stories, a certain kind of story. And here's one of the very first storytelling triumphs of Madison Avenue. It's for Listerine. And this is Sad Edna. She's a spinster at 29. She will never be married. Why is that? Because she has bad breath. Now, this created a sensation. People didn't even know that halitosis was a problem or even what it was until this ad came out. And suddenly, it comes out in Ladies' Home Journal. Everyone's terrified. They're going to wind up alone and afraid. It doesn't talk about the facts and the features of the product. It talks about a story that moves us. In this case, it inspires fear. Now, in the broadcast era, this was called inadequacy marketing. And when you're sitting alone with your Ladies' Home Journal, you don't know who to talk to or how to spread this message or to get feedback on it. So you might just believe this. And the idea of these type of messages is that you, the consumer, are inadequate. You don't have enough. You're not smart enough. You're not good enough. The world is a dangerous place. And this magic product, this magic solution is going to come and save your life, right? Classic inadequacy marketing. It works really well in that old broadcast era. But in the era of Twitter and Facebook, do you think people are going to pass this ad around telling all their friends that they're going to die unpopular with bad breath if they don't get this product? Of course not. Those messages don't spread. But of course we still see them, like these Super Bowl ads for Doritos where the guy's eating Doritos in the delivery room with his wife because his favorite product is so important, it's more important than his wife giving birth. We tend to either think in terms of communicating facts and features, or we look back to the broadcast era and go back to this inadequacy approach. The world is falling apart. You're going to suffer from high energy prices or global warming unless you consume our magical solution. However, this type of thing no longer spreads and no longer inspires audiences. Here's an ad for Dove, classic inadequacy marketing. Here's a woman who's filthy, who just got out of the shower because she used soap, which is a terrible idea, and another woman who used Dove, who's clean. Now, at the bottom, of course, it says this is just an artistic dramatization, so it's not even true. Is this the kind of message that's going to move anybody to action? Of course not. Because it's based on these kind of core human values that are at the lowest level, right? Fear, greed, safety, need for status. If we communicate at this level, people ignore us. Now, early advertising was based on these sort of Freudian notions of what motivates people. But Freud was not the only person who studied human values. Of course, Abraham Maslow looked at Freud's work and said, yes, Freud, you're right that people are driven by those things, but certain kinds of people, because all the people that you studied were mentally ill. They were all your patients. What happens if we study healthy people? And he found that people are not just driven by things like short-term gain and need for comfort and safety, but they're driven by higher level values too. They want to be part of community. They want to belong. They want to have, they feel that they're contributing to the world. They want to actualize their highest potential. And I believe that the stories that we tell in bringing communities together, in getting people involved and excited, cannot just be about either the facts and the features of what we're offering and the technology, and it can't be about threatening them to protect themselves from the worst things happening. We need to tell stories about how this energy revolution helps each individual get to their highest potential. Now, Dove discovered this, of course, and they changed from being all about how filthy you'll be if you'll use other soap to being about busting the beauty myth. This ad, the Real Beauty Sketches ad, is the most popular advertisement in YouTube history. Why? Because it didn't tell women that they would be filthy if they used soap. It told women that they are more beautiful than they think. They use this Maslow approach to saying, society is telling you you're not beautiful. women would describe themselves to a police sketch artist and come out looking, less beautiful than they really are, and then have a stranger describe them to a police sketch artist who would describe them as far more beautiful. When women would see these sketches, they would break down crying. And Dove now stands for breaking down the beauty myth, not simply getting your skin cleaner so that you won't die an ugly spinster, as the old advertising used to do. So this type of approach, the stepping back, the thinking about the stories that we highlight, recognizing that we as entrepreneurs and policymakers and inventors are not the heroes of the story that we tell, but the communities and the stakeholders that we want to reach out to can be the heroes through this revolution, is what brings people to the table and what creates stories that move the needle. Now, my time is actually up, so I can't teach you yet about how to create these stories, but I am teaching a workshop at 4:30, so we can go a little bit deeper. But my goal for you now is just to say, let's break out of the safe thinking cycle of communicating the same old way. Let's find those stories that move people to action, and let's make our constituents and our audiences the hero of those stories so that we can drive this revolution and wind up more like the Wright brothers than Langley. So thank you so much.